Hey everybody, what's going on? We have an amazing show planned today. We've got a fantastic guest joining us, and I'm going to introduce him in just a moment. But before I do, I want to give a word from our sponsors. The Pressing the Limits podcast is brought to you by ZionMissionaryChurch.net, and there you can listen and watch messages, you can share prayer requests, or even find out how to attend drive-in church. That's quite the experience. And also by neuropowersource.com. Now, these are resources for your mind, your body, and your spirit. And if you click on the recommended products link there, you're going to find discount codes for all the equipment, all the biohacking gear, all kinds of goodies to help you along in your journey. Well, our guest today is Mike Salemi. Now, Mike specializes in human performance and is a sought-after international presenter in the field of health and fitness. Mike has a diverse background in strength and conditioning. He has competed over the course of 15 plus years at an elite level in powerlifting as well as kettlebell sport. Through his own path of resolving sports-related injuries, Mike understands the importance of integrating the mind, the body, and the spirit as a means to foster high performance for the long term. His motivation is to help athletes, fitness professionals, and coaches discover their own potential from the inside out. Now, professionally, Mike has served as a Division I strength and conditioning coach for Santa Clara University and has been a trainer to elite athletes across a wide range of sports. His focus is teaching educational workshops, certifications, and creating programs on unconventional training that build more balance in athletes. Now, this is the very interesting part. He is a world champion in kettlebell sport. He has a long cycle master of sport ranking in the long cycle and biathlon. Now, for those of you who are listening and don't know what that is taking two 70-pound kettlebells, cleaning and jerking them in 10 minutes without setting them down. So for 10 straight minutes, you're cleaning and jerking the bells as many times as you can. And then for the biathlon, you're performing a set of jerks for 10 minutes, and I believe it's an hour rest, followed by a set of snatches for 10 minutes. So with all that being said, I have personally witnessed Mike teaching, and he is a fantastic communicator. He invests in people, and he is a master of flow and gracefulness. Mike, welcome to the show.
Man, thank you so much for having me, brother. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for that introduction, man. That was amazing. Thank you.
Well deserved. I've got to watch you in action, and the grace and flow that you are able to operate in. In fact, my friends who have also watched you, that's a key thing, is that you have a gracefulness, a flow, and that's something that you can pass on to athletes. We'll get more into that in a few minutes, but I want to give some background here. How did you get your start in powerlifting?
Powerlifting specifically, I think I pretty much fell into it. I wouldn't say it was. The interesting thing is before powerlifting, I actually started as a gymnast. Now, when I was a gymnast, essentially I had experienced a lower spine injury, so I had a pinched nerve right around L5S1, that region, and that took me out of gymnastics right around the time that I was having a growth spurt. And so the interesting thing is at the time, so I live in the Bay Area, California. The chiropractor that I just happened to go through, that was living in San Mateo and working in San Mateo, like right close to where I was going to school and living, he was a drug-free bench press champion of the world through the WABDL. And so Italian guy, Mike Ludovico, really good dude. And we just became friends and hit it off. And, once he really helped rehabilitate my back, it was right around my freshman year of high school. And I was getting into football. And the funny thing is in football, I loved the weight room. Like, it was a place that you could not get me out of. And in fact, I just remember I was third string running back, never really wanted to be on the field. I was the type of guy who would just go to the back of the huddle or just go to the back of the group when they would call plays or whatever. And I just wanted to be in the gym. And Mike had told me, he goes, it really sounds like you enjoy this weightlifting stuff, this strength training. Why don't you come down to the gym that I go to? I'd have to bring you in. It's like a Key Club invitation only. I think he described it something like it's a colorful place, but come on down. And that was when I was right around 14 years old, and that place was called the Palace Gym. It's no longer, but we had approximately 18 guys down there, all primarily garbage men of garbage company, the old garbage company in the area called BFI, and then police officers and firefighters. And it was just an amazing culture of human beings who were just strong as hell. I mean, this was a lot of those guys in the garbage routes, they'd been working for, 15, 20 years, and they were working before they had the automated truck stuff. So they were pack canning the cans on their shoulder and climbing stairs, and so they were just massive deadlifters. And thankfully Mike and the owner of the gym took me under his wing, and I just fell in love with powerlifting. So that was my initial start, was in this basement cinder block gritty powerlifting gym in the Bay Area, California.
And what's cool about that is your gymnastics background had to put you fast track as far as powerlifting goes, because you understand the principles of high tension and then as well as fast twitch. It's that whole mix of tension, explosion. It's amazing how, Pride Gymnastics really prepped your body, and made it smarter so that you could kind of jump in with an advantage there in powerlifting.
Yeah, I would totally agree. Totally agree. And even like years now later, like even just hearing you say that, like as I reflect, gymnastics was just an incredible base for me. And what I found, like looking back now, I went into powerlifting like not fighting my body, like not having to fight like serious joint restrictions or anything like that. And as you know, like so much about being a high level lifter is about positioning, alignment, body awareness. And the body awareness that you get from gymnastics, as well as the ability to hit positions with control, is absolutely massive. So I started off conventional, but I ended up, as the years progressed, competing in sumo. But the ability to hit like a wider stance and then be able to descend down and just again just hit those right positions and those right alignments, or the bottom of a squat with a wider stance, all those things, I attribute it now, and even back then, very much so to gymnastics, hand for sure.
Yeah, and what's so interesting, you're talking about sumo versus conventional. Gymnastics also teaches you to have strength in all of those flexibility positions. Many people, that we all have a super strong position, but you begin to put some mobility there, and a lot of people are very weak in the flexibility, whether it's the depth of a squat, whether it's getting into a sumo position. So that's super interesting. And then you made this transition, and real interested in how and then why you made the transition into kettlebell training, because there's a huge difference, and then eventually into the suplex system.
Yeah, man, there couldn't be two sports that are more different from one another. I mean, they both utilize weights, right?
Mm-hmm.
But, but powerlifting, right? 1 rep max, squat, bench, dead. Kettlebell lifting, 10 minutes nonstop Olympic weightlifting movements. Not only just the physical aspects of it, but the mental aspects couldn't be more different. And so my mindset, I would just say like my fiber type, I can put mass on, even though I'm running pretty lean right now, I can put size on fairly easy. And my mindset, everything is more of like a power athlete. And what I found is after competing in powerlifting, it was I made the transition from powerlifting actually to Olympic weightlifting right after I came back from living in Italy for a year. Competed in Olympic weightlifting for a year under Jim Schmitz, who was our 3-time U.S. Olympic coach.
Yep.
Worked with him for about a year. It was a great experience. And at that time, I started becoming a strength and conditioning coach at the collegiate level. So like Santa Clara and then a few other community colleges in the area. And one of the things that I found is like my mindset always as a coach especially is like I want to make sure that I can teach and share from an authentic place. And so if I'm going to share any tool, any modality with my athletes, like I need to make sure that I've gone through and really just earned it and put in the blood, sweat, and tears to really understand the tool. And so I was looking for a tool that was a little bit more functional and a little bit more portable, that I could use on the field, on the course, wherever it may be. And, kettlebells, and this, we're talking way back, right? Were becoming more and more popular, and they had that old school appeal. So I started taking certifications, and actually at one certification, it was Steve Cotter's. It was actually Steve Cotter's. I think it was his second, don't quote me, but let's say second, third, or something like that, ever IKFF certification. And I had met Steve a few years before because we flew him out to do a private workshop at my local place. And, two of his assistant instructors were kettlebell sport competitors, and John Wild Buckley and Jason Dolby. And those guys are hugely responsible for building and growing the U.S. kettlebell sport movement to what it is today and what it's really evolved into. And they pulled me aside at the end of the course. They're like, man, like, have you heard of kettlebell sport? Do you know what it is? And I was like, no, not quite familiar, don't really know. But they were like, I think you'd be really good at it. Why don't you give it a try? And John was living in Berkeley at the time, which isn't too far away from me. And honestly, the aside from wanting to use it with my athletes and understand the tool to its potential, I just really wanted a challenge. Like, I suck. I will say that again, I suck at like long duration liftings. It's taken anything still more than 5 reps for me is like a ton of volume. So, and it takes like I've got to psych myself over getting to a specific mental space to support that. But I really love the challenge and the growth that came with it and continues to come with it. I'm super humbled by, for sure.
It's so interesting. You mentioned Jim Schmidt. I used to write for Iron Mind, and he had his old Olympic manuals. I still have it somewhere. Jim Schmidt's the spiral bound Olympic lifting manual. He was like one of the first guys that really could teach Olympic lifting. I remember getting that. And then, you mentioned Steve Cotter. What's so cool about Steve is I think he was one of the first guys with kettlebells that, and we'll talk more about this, but would have focused on that working inward as well as working outward. And with the Qigong, that was always a key part of his kettlebell seminars. And then Jason Dolby with the Indian clubs. There's so many different things. You talk about these guys, it's kind of a who's who of who put things on the map. And then later, how did you become involved with the Suples implements?
Suples was interesting because, like, Suples, I've been using the Bulgarian bag for probably now almost 11 years. Yeah, about 11 years. And so I saw it like a few years after I started lifting kettlebells. Like, I don't honestly recall the first time I saw it. I'm pretty sure I'm almost willing to bet it was a YouTube video of Coach Ivan demonstrating the bag. And Ivan, super well. And it's like to see him move and master that tool and the explosiveness, the athleticism, the changing directions, the acceleration, the grip. I remember just being able to see something and knowing, just since I was younger, like what's the real deal and what is something that's just a gimmick or what's BS. So I had ordered a few bags, but to be honest, they were much like many people today. They were just sitting in the gym. Like I was using them for squats and lunges, and I would try and do some dynamic stuff with it, but I really could never find any education on it. And so it wasn't until honestly years later, just in the last 4 years, maybe, yeah, give or take 4 years, that more education has slowly been available. And then as soon as I saw a course and took a workshop, I was like, contacted Suples directly, spoke with their head of education, now a good friend of mine, Bridget Yates Hosick, who's no longer there, but still a very good friend. And I was like, how do I be a part of this? Like, how do I grow this thing? I believe in it. As soon as I got my hands on it and really started training the dynamic movements, I was like, this thing's going to be a part of my training forever. And so I've just spent quite a bit of time, weeks at a time, in Boise training with Coach Ivan, multiple practices a day, going to his wrestling practices, training with his guys. And I have a tremendous amount of admiration and respect for Ivan, and that tool is for sure the real deal. As it's no BS for sure.
Yeah, Ivan, he's amazing. And what I love is that you have taken those concepts, because a lot of people will watch the videos and they don't understand the whole flow of putting the exercises together. They watch him and they just basically break down, and they'll end up just doing, you know, some kind of rotational or lunges or swings, and he puts them all together. And I think you're one of the guys that really models that, is that the power, to me personally, with the Bulgarian bags, is putting things together in a flow. Like I said, I've trained people with the Bulgarian bags, and what they want to do is just kind of rep out with, you know, we talk about lunges or jump squats or some kind of swing or doing the rotations. But the power, to me, in the suplex stuff is all about the flow. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think, I think every training tool, I mean, especially the unconventional ones, every training tool has its has its own personality, kind of. Like each tool has its own, advantages, disadvantages. No one's better than the other. It's just always the question of like, what are you trying to achieve and who are we talking about? And I think you're exactly right. Like for me personally, the Bulgarian bag is amazing for rotational strength, is amazing especially for grip. Of course, these combination movements as well. The ball, which is like the brother or the sister to the
Oh,
Bulgarian
yeah.
bag, which I know you work with as well. That tool for me, I would say, the ball is exquisite for cardiovascular conditioning, is exquisite for speed, and then coordination. And when it comes to coordination, like the way that I typically progress with the ball and how I teach it especially is exactly how you're saying. So let's say we took, I don't know, 3 movements or 5 movements, as opposed to treating it like a complex, like 10 reps in each of those movements, back to back to back. The way that you really progress with the ball is essentially how few of movements, like a flow or a chain, how few of movements can you do a repetitions and transition and transition and transition. It's not about the weight. In fact, 80+% of the ball that I use is only 9 pounds. Sometimes I'll use the 13,
Mm-hmm.
but it's literally how quickly, how efficiently, how much can I rotate, change, level change the patterns, change the angles, change the grips. That is really what the ball's about. So the Bulgarian bag, certainly you can progress in that way, and I enjoy training it in that way. But the ball is like where that can be taken to a whole nother level. And actually, like that can be a training routine by itself. Just like throw on some music. Ivan would like throw on European techno probably
Mm-hmm.
if you're
Oh,
training
yeah.
with him. And I mean that in all seriousness. And it's just about, getting out of your head, right? At first, like with any new tool, you're learning the movements, you're understanding positioning, and there's a lot of thought, a lot of conscious effort. But then once you master the movement, then it's really about going inward, and that's when the play comes out. And that's really what, to be honest, I mean, I love kettlebells. That's like my roots, much like yours as well. But I will say that the Bulgarian bag and the ball and the supla stuff in general has like reinvigorated this play in me I've like been craving for a long time for sure.
Now that's awesome. And you said you were in Italy for a year. How is your Italian?
So it's interesting. So it was good out there. Both my mom and dad are from Sicily, and my grandparents in the house, like I grew up with my grandparents, and so they would speak Sicilian. So I
Mm.
never really spoke Italian, but I had to learn it there because Sicilian won't get you too far
Mm-hmm.
unless you're, with family down south. So spent a year out there, ended up going to one of the Italian universities, and then didn't really use it too much over the years. But then in the last 2 years, I've actually been going back to teach out there, and man, like what like a challenge and something that's really been exciting to like be able to communicate training knowledge and like basic anatomy or positioning and coaching in Italian. Like that's been for sure a growth experience that's been really fun, that a challenge that I've been really excited to take on. And the Italians are just freaking great students, like and so colorful. Like I remember when I was out there, man, we would be training. When I was living out there, I was still powerlifting, and I was training at a powerlifting gym out there. Like I was taking 3 buses, almost an hour and a half to the outskirt of Rome, and then 3 buses back, going on cobblestones and stuff. And I would be training with some guys, and we would be in the middle of a set, and they would be like, hold on, like and we need to go get espresso. And they would call the bar that they had a relationship with, the cafe, and they would bring on this circular table, like, espresso shot glasses, and we would sit down. And I'm like, what in the world is going on here? Is this like really happening? So it was a great experience, man.
Dude, that is so cool. I was actually supposed to be in Italy right now, pre the coronavirus thing. We were supposed to be on a television show out there to break a Guinness world record. And I was so disappointed because, I've always wanted to, been so interested in the culture out there. We were supposed to be in Rome, is where it was going to be filmed. So just it's interesting that we talked about that, because again, I was so disappointed because the people just have such a cool vibe. I was just so looking forward to being a part of that. So hopefully when this thing lifts, we're still going to be able to go when the travel resumes. Let's talk about technique and training. Technique is so important, and how important it is when it comes to kettlebell lifting. I know for me, for years, and even until recently, I used to just muscle up the bells. I could knock out, the snatch test and all this stuff, but I was really muscling that thing, not focusing on corkscrewing or anything with the hand placement. And, how important is that? I noticed that you've been wearing the Halo Sport, which kind of reinforces that technique. I've actually been wearing that too. I had the original one and just could never really get good contact with it, but the Halo Sport is pretty awesome. Talk to me a little bit about how important technique is to you in training.
When you said that, like, one story just came up. When I was training in Russia for Kettlebell Sport, this was 2011. And actually, we were talking about Steve Cotter. So Steve Cotter was on that trip.
Mm-hmm.
Jeff Martone, Ken Blackburn, Sean Mosen. We had a whole slew of just rock stars out there and just good people. And, on that trip, there was one of the, like, I don't know if you want to call him, like, one of the God, not want to say godfathers, but like one of the big guys in kettlebell sports, Sergey Rudenev, he was either speaking of himself or one of his top students. And it was one of his top students. I recall what the guy looked like. So tiny guy, like, let's just say a buck 30, right? 130
Okay.
pounds. And he asked the question, and we were talking, it was overhead movements. We were talking about the jerk and the press. And we were talking about technical efficiency and the importance of technique. And I'll ask you this question. So he goes, the guy's number was, he was an over 100 repetition double kettlebell, double 32 kilos, so one in each hand, jerks overhead. And he asked the questions. This guy could do, let's say, 101 jerks. How many single kettlebell overhead strict presses do you think he could do?
Well, they're totally different. It's a total different beast. The strict press is a totally different thing. So I'm going to say maybe 10, 15 an arm.
Okay. You're 100 totally different lifts, but the dude couldn't even do one.
Oh, my
Not
goodness.
even one, right?
Oh, my
And
goodness.
yeah, which is just really interesting, right? And it's just, and that's how much, when you utilize the legs and you know how to get underneath the weight and you know how to breathe and like, all those things come into play. And I was like, wow.
That's crazy. That blows me away.
Yeah, right? Like, you would think at least get 5 or something, 3 to 5. And so that was one thing that I'll always remember. But man, for me, technique is everything. Like, technique is the key to unlocking your potential. It's like, the more technical you are, if you do combine that with some sound strength training principles, like, you'll go, not only will your strength potential go just further, but your longevity. Like, one of the things that I've always been huge on is longevity in lifting.
Mm-hmm.
And with better technique, you're going to be less likely to be fighting your body, and you're going to be able to handle, the volume's going to be kinder to you in the long run. And so if you can focus on the technique early on and really fall in love with it, you're going to be able to, again, and you're going to be able to express your potential so much more in things like we're talking about, like flows. But if every single time, let's say you utilize the soupless ball, or you do a kettlebell snatch or a kettlebell clean, and you're like impacting the forearms, and it's just like, pain's not the best teacher in that respect. So yeah, technique is a massive part of just longevity, and then hopefully, enjoying lifting that much more.
So with that in mind, and I want to talk a little, I'll mix these next two questions together. What kind of mobility work do you do as part of your training system? And how do you structure programs for your athletes? Because for me, I had for about 2.5 years big time shoulder injury. The symptoms, the best way I could explain it would be like frozen shoulder. So I had to do all kinds of personal rehab and was still doing a lot of overhead stuff, but it was very painful and had to adjust weights. Again, there was big challenges with that. And that was from years of no mobility work in the beginning. I mean, now at age 48, mobility is so important. How do you structure programs for your athletes, and how important is that mobility to teaching them, proper technique?
Yeah, it's a great question because the mobility work for me, it takes priority over the training, 100%. 10 times out of 10, it's going to take priority. So if I'm short on time or my athletes are short on time, 100% I'm going to tell them do your mobility work before your training. It doesn't matter because that allows you the potential. That is the potential that allows you to express whatever it is you want to do in the gym. And so many people, at least in my experience and the athletes I work with, the initial phases of training is all just trying to undo the what we call pattern overload and the imbalances and all that stuff. So I mean, and this is in every sport was interesting. Like I experienced some type of injury in almost every single sport, and I think part of that comes with the territory. Like at a certain level or a certain time, like injury risk just goes up as the higher level of lifter. The more volume you do, the more weights you lift, etc. The more you're breaking your body down. But if you also add on like, oh my gosh, I have no range in the shoulder, like let's say you're competing in kettlebell sport, for example, and when you raise your arm just even above the level of the eyes, all of a sudden as your arms move, so does your spine. Like let's say your pelvis or your pelvis turns into like a Donald Duck position, or your chest jets forward. Like all those things are going to cause wear and tear and instability in the joints. So the mobility aspect for me is the key to longevity. And if you focus there, everything else gets better. And so my mobility routine, depending on the day, usually takes a minimum of 10 minutes. And sometimes I do full mobility workouts for an hour or so, but usually between 10 and 20 minutes. It's the most religious part of my training. And then as it relates to athletes, it's a super individual question, but what I will say is I'll break it down into phases. And so irregardless of who it is, when they come to me, there's going to be some type of orthopedic assessment. So I'm going to kind of break down their body and see where they're at. Of course, see what their goals are and such. But then once we do that, then the actual training phases will typically be broken down into like a developmental corrective phase where the focus is foundations of movement and correcting most of the imbalances that they're most likely going to have. Then we go into some type of general conditioning and skill development phase, and then we'll do a performance phase. And depending on when their competition is or where they're at, when you're working with athletes, as you're super familiar, like nothing's perfect between travel schedules and food and all those aspects that can kind of make these programs and program designs change. But what I will say is, and working with Paul Chek, I would say he's been probably the biggest inspiration for my style of coaching today. It's very holistic. And so, whereas maybe when I was in college or a strength and conditioning coach early on, I would only look at the physical. I would only look at what was on the program design sheet and create these programs, but I wasn't looking at everything else that wasn't said, which was a way bigger part of the puzzle. Like, what are they eating? How are their relationships going? How are they sleeping? And all those things need to be accounted for in the training if, once again, we're going to not only reach a high level, but reach a high level for years and years to come.
I love that. And I'm going to combine these next questions, kind of one, because you already hit on one of your mentors and the journey that you took with him. And just share a little bit about having him as a mentor as well as anybody else, and how he helped you and how you now combined the mind, body, spirit into your programming, the importance of working in as well as working out, breath skill, all that kind of stuff. Kind of lump that in because so many people don't do any internal work. They mindlessly go through their workouts, and they never take any time to do any internal work, especially within the workout, you know. So can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Like, and this, sometimes I'm asked by, like, let's say I'm on social media or going live or something like that. And I think too, like, people might look at certain aspects of my life or even certain aspects of your life too, and they're like, "Oh, I can never do that. I can never do that." But what they don't realize is this is all an evolution, right? Like where
Mm-hmm.
I was when I first started competing in powerlifting, I mean, I was meal prepping at 14, cooking my meals and eating and avoiding alcohol a lot of times in college and in high school and stuff like that. So, but it didn't all start like it didn't where I'm at now. It's just been like, learning and mastering one habit and then another habit and then another habit. And then through competing, like competing has been one of the biggest teachers for me. Like you train, you learn, then you have your off season. And so with Paul, I started getting familiar with his work when I was about 18, and I would consider myself super blessed just to have fallen into having great mentors and great coaches.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was at that gym, the Palace Gym, one of my teammates, this guy Ed Barnes, he high level lifter, and he was like, man, you really like love this stuff. Like I knew from 14 that this is exactly what I want to do. I was super fortunate in that respect. Like I knew at 14 that in some way shape or form I want to teach, share, and inspire and coach lifters and coach performance. And he was like, you should really meet my buddy Brian Champ. He owns a gym. It's called, I think at that time it was called Optimal Fitness Lifestyle Center. And he goes, I think you guys would really hit it off. So he takes me to the gym, and at the time, so Brian was the strength and conditioning coach for most of the colleges in the area, and he was one of the first Czech trained professionals, one of the first or the first in the Bay. So we're talking years ago. And his whole facility, I would say, overall was modeled after Paul's teachings.
Mm.
Like hypnotherapists, acupuncturists, Czech professionals, functional medicine people, they were doing lab testing and like really thorough assessments, athletes and general pop. And so me and Brian really hit it off. And because I was so heavily involved in powerlifting, and it was right before I went to Westside, actually, we decided to do a trade. He was like, why don't you teach me powerlifting? And he was super open-minded. And he goes, and I'll help you with your nutrition and I'll help you, elevate your performance. And so a lot of what he coached me on was Paul's teachings, and I got How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy, which is for me is like let's just say the Bible of holistic health and performance that, with that, like I feel like you can heal 90% of the sports and just health issues that we face today. And, over time I started taking courses from Paul's Czech Institute, which has got some super deep information. But it wasn't until I started working with Paul one-on-one to help resolve an injury in my left forearm or compartment syndrome that no one could figure out. That was the thing that was preventing me and holding me back from hitting Master of Sport and winning the WAKSE Worlds. And so I was in a course with Paul, Holistic Lifestyle Coaching Level 2, and I approached him and I was like, I had just competed, and it was 2+ years going after that ranking and failing and coming close, like 1 rep, 2 rep, 3 rep, 4 rep, 5 rep, couldn't hit it. And I told him, I said, like, this is what's going on, and you're really the only guy that I know that could potentially solve this, considering I've seen everyone I could see. And I always say to people, like, Paul's really made his career solving medical failures. And so when no one could figure out what was going on from the most ranged cases in the world, they would go see him. And so he grabbed my forearm and asked me a few questions. And I always tell people, like, two things really sold me on Paul working with him. One was, if anyone who may be listening, like, is not familiar with Paul, highly recommend checking him out. Type his name in and look, he's almost 60, and he's more jacked and built with, than I'll ever be. And it's just on good food and smart training. So the guy lives what he teaches and lives what he preaches. But then the other thing is, in addition to that, he didn't promise me anything. He was the first guy that I went to as a coach, therapist, practitioner that didn't say they would heal me or he was like, I'm not positive. And even with all of his experience, I have to get you on a table, do an assessment, and we'll go from there. But I do believe I can help, but I can't be for sure. And so already I was like, shoot, okay, there's probably something to this. Let me go check it out. And fast forward 2.5 years, I was flying down once a month for anywhere from 4 hours to 2 days. And we'd work on every single aspect of the human performance, of the human individual. So from the spiritual side to the nutritional side, to the training side, to my relationships. And that's really where I would say my school of holistic high performance really started taking off, and I started diving into adding in all these other elements, like working in, like you're saying.
Yeah, and how do you, we talk about the working in, how do you design that concept, or at least the awareness, into the programs that you design for people? Because we're such individuals when it comes to what that looks like. When you're designing programs for individuals, do you basically just trying to create an awareness of working in, or do you actually take them through some sample spiritual exercises or breathing techniques or meditations? What does that look like?
Yeah, it depends really where that individual is at. Like what I find is, everyone's at a different place. Everyone's got different
Mm-hmm.
goals or objectives. So the first and most important thing is always to meet them where they're at, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm speaking even like to myself. Like for me, working in was the most perfect introduction to mindfulness and some of this inner work, because I always had this judgment on a lot of like inner work, meditation, stuff like that. That it wasn't for Westerners. Like it wasn't for me. Like I'm Italian. I grew up like my whole family yells at each other during family meals. Like, we're talking with our mouthfuls and speaking with our hands, and the a whole Eastern philosophy. I just didn't grow up in that. I didn't have that upbringing. And so to incorporate movement with meditation, which is really what working in is, and at a simpler level, just integrating breath with movement, which is the key to any practice, any spiritual practice, anything like that. That's the anchor. That's the key to put you back into your body at any time. So to get us out of our head and into our body. And so with working in, at least now my experience, I learned about working in through Paul and the Czech Institute. And this is all in his book, How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy. And he's got videos on this. If anyone's interested, or in his courses, check them out. But essentially, you can get very specific in terms of, so for example, so in that book, Paul signifies 6 different zones of the body, and it's correlated with the chakra system. Now, there's 7 major chakras. There's actually many more than that. But of the 7, let's say major, he defines 6. And then he breaks up each zone of the body. So zone 1 would be the root chakra, let's say, or the area right around the lower pelvic region. That area has a specific developmental theme associated with it. So the themes of that zone of the body is going to be like financial security, tribal association, things like that. And so if someone's experiencing a challenge in their life around financial security, it may show up as problems and issues in that area. Could show up as muscular tightness. Could show up as, injuries to that area, if we're talking just on the physical sense of things. And so what you can do is you can take these developmental themes. Let's take it even an easier one, like the heart chakra, which is chakra zone number 4, the area, the chest region. The theme with that is giving and receiving love. And so if someone's having relationship challenges and stuff like that, it can manifest itself into physical issues. And so what you can do is you can do a zone exercise, a working in exercise for that zone of the body, to help bring awareness, to help bring energy, to help bring flow to that area and get more movement. Because usually pain and dysfunction oftentimes has to do, especially energetically, has to do with stagnations in the body. And so you can be very specific with that. So through my assessments and through talking with someone, if they're open to the working in exercises, which the beauty is they're very simple and very user friendly. Any exercise can be a working in exercise. A body weight squat done at the right tempo and with the right intention that I can share in a moment is a working in an energy cultivating exercise. And so you can take even a challenge that someone's going on in their life and you can give them these working in movements for that region. And it's incredible. Like for me, movement's always been the key to unlock physical potential, spiritual potential, emotional potential. I've learned so much through the process of training and competing that it's enriched my life in so many different ways. And so, for example, let's take the squat, right? What Paul did in a really cool way was he took familiar exercises, or again, you can take any exercise, but you take an exercise and then you integrate the breath with the movement. So, for example, on a squat, on the lowering phase, you would exhale. On the raising phase, you would inhale. Now, that's working with your natural physiology when stabilization does not become more important. I'm sorry, when respiration does not become more important than stabilization of the spine. So if you're squatting 500 pounds, you know at some level you're going to have to utilize some type of stabilization breath holding strategy. You have to. You have to create that pressure. But if there is no threat to the system, you're unloaded, the natural breathing rhythm when the body moves into flexion or forward bending is exhaling. The ribs are closing down. When you extend the body, when you open the body, that is inhalation breath. And so on the lowering phase of the squat, you exhale. On the raising phase, you inhale. Now, throughout that sequence, the criteria to let you know if you're working in, if you're actually cultivating, harnessing energy in the body, as opposed to expelling or expanding energy, like a workout, which we're all familiar with. If you're working in, you shouldn't sweat. If you're working in, your heart rate and respiratory rate should not elevate. If you're working in, you should be able to do it on a full stomach and your digestion should improve. And also, if you're working in, your tongue should stay moist. Like I'm sure we've all had the experience, like when you eat, I always use this analogy, like you have a big dinner with your family, then you go walk to your car, after you go to a restaurant. Usually by the time you hit your car, you feel better. You feel like you've digested your food better. Walking is a working in movement. And so once again, we can add the energy, we can add the resources on board. And when you combine that with sound training, when we learn to balance the amount of working out, energy expenditure that we're doing with working in, our potential as a person for how much volume, for how much training we can do incrementally goes up. And you're going to be, when we talk about plateaus, overtraining, injuries, those are all things that I suffered with for years. When you talk about those things, it's oftentimes an imbalance in this working in, working out, or anabolic catabolic system. So it was a simple way to take, once again, familiar movements and incorporate breath with movement to keep that, to develop that more inner work and spiritual practice as well.
Yeah, it's so interesting because you have to fill your tank. So many people don't understand that athletically, emotionally, spiritually, they're running on empty and they're doing nothing to fill that tank and wondering, why they're not making those gains. And when I talk to people about some of this stuff, they think it's too woo-woo, and I explain to them. I used to take groups, through at the end when I do group training. One of the things we would finish with, just to kind of switch systems in what they've been operating in, was a simple Qigong, breath exercise. We would go through probably about 2 to 3 minutes of Qigong, and people are like, "Oh, I don't understand what." I said, all this means is breath skill. What we're doing is we're developing internal skill to match the external skills, and it's just so important that people, step into some of this stuff and start to work inside. Like I said, I just feel like so many times our tank is totally empty and, it's a huge, huge thing. So I appreciate you sharing that. Let me ask you because we got a lot of people, who are locked down in quarantine right now, very basic, access to things right now. What are one or two of the most bang for the buck exercises that you think people could do right now?
So I'll give, so training movements, I'm a massive fan of the squat at any way, shape, or form. Any way you can get it in, whether it's body weight, working in, like we're just talking with those criteria, whether it's throwing a bag of sand on your shoulder, grabbing your child. The multi-joint movement with that, for me, it's like the king of the movements. And also, too, with the right awareness, with the right alignment, it's one of the best exercises to improve what we call the gravity line, or just, let's say, the postural line and how your body moves in gravity. So I'm a massive fan of the squat. The other thing that I would say is just walking. Like, walking is when you look at it's like when you look at the people who live the longest, what's the one like movement thing that they typically all have in common? You
Yep.
typically always see them walking. So it's a working in exercise. It gets you outside. I mean, if you did it on a treadmill, that's fine. But, if you can get outside, get some air, get some sun, walk for at least 20 minutes. If you're open to it, leave your phone at home and just watch everything else in your day get better. From your level of clarity to groundedness to you can do it before meals, after meals, you can do it at any time. So those are the two things I would suggest is biggest bang for your buck for longevity as well as performance. Some type of body weight and or loaded squat with any tool that you got. Just get it in, and then walking.
And it's so true because that has so many things to do. We talk about posture. One of the things you were talking about is chakras and all these different things. I have found that posture a lot of times indicates something that has gone on in their lives. If people are really struggling, you'll notice that, they don't look you in the eye, or their shoulders are humped over. Some of these things we see that there's a postural effect of what's going on spiritually, emotionally, relationally. And by incorporating those two exercises right there, you're already going to help increase, the healthy posture positions. I love those suggestions. People are sitting far too much right now. So just even walking is going to open up, the thoracic spine and some of these things. Those are fantastic, fantastic exercises. What's one thing that you are really passionate about right now?
Man, our whole conversation. I have to tell you, get me fired up, bro. This conversation for sure, and also what I will say is like I've been working like everything that we've talked about. Everything is really what I've been distilling down for the last 6 months into my newest program. It's called Kettlebell Lifestyle,
Mm-hmm.
and basically it takes an intuitive approach to strength and conditioning. It certainly is kettlebell workouts, but they're broken down into the phases that I discussed earlier. Um, and it meets the individual where they're at. And so what I mean by that is there's actual like I created, and this is a lot of this is inspired once again from my work with Paul and the Czech Institute, where we would take metrics every single day for 2.5 years, super detailed metrics to check in and then develop the relationship of how hard should I go, when should I back off, what would be my training day. It was a very flexible way of training because what I found was I've had some amazing coaches that I mentioned over the years, and I don't want to say any route is wrong. Every route has its purpose and is right for an individual. But what I found was sticking too strictly to a rigid program that like my mindset's like if it's on paper, I'm doing it. And if I don't finish it, I feel like a failure. I don't feel like I honored my coach and I let down maybe my team. And so, Paul was one of the biggest inspirations to have a flexible approach to training. So in Kettlebell Lifestyle, it teaches you that. So there's a very simple 5-question questionnaire that you can fill out every single training day. And it's like a training readiness assessment. It goes in conjunction with sleep, musculoskeletal system, soreness, and recovery. It looks at gut health, looks at motivation level and stress. And based off of that, your program, especially volume and what you should do on that day, should you be working in or should you be doing your stretching program, everything changes dynamically to meet you where you're at. So it's a 9-week total program, but it could take you 6 months to go through because it's going to change day by day. And so it's been a monster to build on the back end and the tech behind it. But like the results, we just released the beta phase, the first round of it, like, I don't know, 6 weeks ago. And the results like literally have been I actually, we did a group coaching call. I ended up crying on the first call because I was so just happy and just so excited for what people were experiencing with it, because just teaching lifting, I do enjoy it, but it doesn't do it for me anymore. Like if I'm just teaching technique, I love it. I really do. But without teaching these other aspects that for me are equally, if not more important to building the whole individual and having, creating more longevity and helping people, develop a deeper relationship with these lessons in the gym, that's really what excites me. And so there's working in movements. There's, personalized stretching programs. You fill out questionnaires, you go through a bunch of stretches, and then I've developed an algorithm on the back end that kicks out like a 12 to 15-minute stretching program that you keep retesting. It's a deep program, but it's something I'm so excited about. And so my dream with it, I want to build 10,000 balanced warriors out there, people that are very much into this style of training. It's not for everyone. It's a very deep look at training, technique, mindfulness, breath work every day. There's morning routines when you wake up. But for people, who really want to go deeper and really transform their health right now, it's a pretty cool program.
I love that you talked about creating warriors and just kind of, pulling that out of people, because I think deep down we were all created to have that warrior mentality. And so you're able to pull that out of them, even though maybe it's been suppressed or pushed down. I really, I just want to tell everybody that's listening, believe in what Mike is doing. Like I said, I believe he's one of the best coaches that I have seen out there. He is so thorough. And so I would like you to tell people how they can, be a part of this program, where they can access your resources, and anything else you'd like to share, because I think you have such value to add to people, and we want to get the word out about what you're doing. So if you could share that information with our listeners, that would be great.
Yeah, thank you so much, man. I really appreciate it. One thing that I think that has always been of big interest to me is like teaching people, yes, an intuitive way to train, but teaching people how all these things integrate, whether it's all the tools, how does the soupless integrate with the ball, integrate with the bell? How do those things integrate with all these other aspects of mindfulness, nutrition, etc.? And so if anyone is interested specifically in kettlebell lifestyle, and by the way, that whole program, and this was one of the hardest things to create with it, the whole program I created so it can be done with just one bell.
Awesome.
So it all not just like single kettlebells. Like if you just had an 8 kilo, there's a whole questionnaire and automated process to give you answer like 4 questions. What's your recommended weight 1, weight 2, weight 3 based off of your budget? So it is more, because of that, you will get stronger, but it's more of a muscular endurance and conditioning program. But in times like this, when we're all at home, like literally if all you could afford is an 8 kilo or a 12 kilo bell right now, you can do the entire program and still get a phenomenal training effect. And that's at kettlebelllifestyle.com. You can find out more about that program. We're in the beta phase right now. In about a month, we'll do the full-blown launch, but there you can learn about it there. I'm also super active on social media, mainly on Instagram. And actually during COVID, just to support people, I did over 30 days of every single day lives, where the original intention was to go 15 minutes, but I get too excited. So some of them were hour and a half, 2-hour sessions where it was just like, it covered everything from individual or like myofascial stretching, classic stretching with some details, working in days, training instruction. Every single workout day I gave teaching segments, workouts, tons of Q&A. And so one of the people in the community was so kind. He somehow got all the downloads from those 30 plus days from Instagram lives that disappear, was able to get them, and I just got them, and I'm putting them up today on a Facebook group. So for free, people can just go in, and if they want 30 plus days of coaching, Q&A on everything, they can take advantage of that. And that's on Instagram, which is mike.salemi.
So when you're done listening to this today, people, go out and follow Mike on Instagram. Yeah, we want you to follow us, but right now you need to get on that, because it will be an investment in your health, and you need to do that. Like I said, Mike is a tremendous teacher. Is there anything else you want to share with us today?
No, man, just thank you so much for having me. This has been, super fun, and I appreciate you giving me, supporting me, and just really appreciate you guys.
Well, thank you. I want to thank you for adding value to each person who is listening or watching today. So we thank our guest, Mike Salemi, and our sponsors, ZionMissionaryChurch.net, NeuroPowerSource.com, podcast producer Drew Kiespert, film director Jolyn Thomas, and be sure to rate us and subscribe to the Pressing the Limits podcast. For more ways to watch and listen to this podcast, check out the Pressing the Limits podcast website.